So hey everyone, and in this video we are going to understand a very exciting and very important topic. So a lot of you are actually confused what is API. So API, first of all, it stands for Application Programming Interface, is a set of rules and protocols that allows different software applications to communicate and interact with each other. That is, if you have two different software applications, if you want them to communicate, for example, you have a front end, you have a back end. If you want them to communicate, you would be using an API as a mediator, which allows you to connect your front end to back end. That is, if you want to send some data or receive some data from front end to back end, then you'd be using an API, right? So APIs define how different software components should interact, including the data formats they use and the operations they can perform. They are used to enable the integration of different system services and applications, allowing them to work together. So there are several methods which APIs actually use. That is, we'll be learning them later on. But let's first of all understand with a very great example, how does API work? So suppose you are in a restaurant and you can assume that the customer is front end, the back end is the chef, API is the waiter. Yes, so this is a very basic example. Here you can see that the customer won't directly give the order to backend. Customer would request the waiter, that is the API, to get me some food. For example, the first step here is I'm asking for French fries. So customer asked for get French fries. So the waiter took this request and sent it to the chef. So now the chef has a request named as get French fries. So this black means request, right? Now as a response, chef sent French fries. So you can see with this green, I have marked the response. Okay, so 3 is the third step. So first step is from customer to waiter. Then second step is from waiter to chef. Third step is chef sent this French fries prepared food to the waiter. Okay, we can actually have two responses. So this is actually first response, that is French fries is available and it's prepared. Second response can be French fries is not available, or server is busy, chef is busy, or server has crashed. Any kind of problem can also be there. Okay, not just correct responses. So we'll talk about responses later on. But suppose you got the correct response, that is everything is fine, you got French fries. So French fries are sent from the API to the customer. That means API would take these French fries from the backend, from the chef to the customer. Okay, so that's how actually things work in a restaurant, and the same is the process for APIs into the web development field. Okay, so I hope you understood API purpose with an example. This is a very great example and very useful example. Okay, so now let's explore different methods which we have here. So guys, we have some methods which start from get, post, patch, put, delete. So by default, we have the get method in most of the cases, but if you want to do different operations, you have separate methods. So now let's understand each of them one by one. So there can be cases where you just want to get some data from front end to back end, right? You also want to send data from front end to back end. So first you get data from back end to front end, so you'd be using the get method. If you want to send some data from front end to back end, that is, for example, you are registering a user, so the register page would be on front end, right? So you'd be getting some details in front end, you'd be writing some details in the front end, you'd be sending that data to back end. Backend would do what? Backend would save that to database. So for those cases, the post method would be called. Then we have patch and put. They are used to update things. Then we have the delete method to delete any specific field. So for example, the get method is used to retrieve data from a server. That is, for example, you want to get user data. So you'd be creating an API with the get method, and you would be naming it get user data, like any name you can give that API. This would give you the user data of any specific user. So this is known as get user. You're just getting the data, you're just reading that data. That means this is the get method. Then we talk about post method. So post method is like when you want to save the data to database. So backend, what does the backend do? Now, for example, you would be creating your APIs in the backend, right? So backend would simply do a few things. For example, if something is there in the database, user data is there in the database, backend would be connected to database, right? So what actually happens is, let me just explain the architecture of the development field. So a full stack architecture is simply, first of all, you have a front end, which is actually like you would create your front end using normal HTML, CSS, or you would be using React JS. Okay, so whatever it is, your front end is there. Okay, so your front end, for example, I made my front end using HTML. Okay, very basic thing, but you can use React JS also. That's what merge stack is about. So your front end is here. Then you have a backend. Okay, then you have a backend, then you have API which acts as a mediator between front end and backend, then you have the database. Okay, so database would be located somewhere else which would contain all the data. Okay, so backend is for processing, database is for containing the data. So what actually happens is, from front end, if you request using get method, so you would request get user data, so API would send that request to backend. Now backend would go to the database, would look for the user data and would send this back to the backend, and then with the API, then it would receive to the front end. So that's how actually this whole architecture works. So backend does not have the data, backend takes the data from database. That means our chef does not have the food. Okay, chef would take the food from the inventory and then prepare it fully. Okay, so that's what the backend does. Backend only does the processing. Food is in the inventory, that is in the database, right? So that's what the purpose is. Now you will be able to understand things better. Okay, so what you would say is, first of all, the get method. Let's explain the get method, then we'll move on. So first of all, what's the purpose of get method? When you want to get some kind of data, for example, you want to get user data, or you want to get weather data of a city. Okay, so these are all the get methods. Okay, get weather data, whatever you want, you're just getting things. Okay, that means you're getting some data from the database to backend to the front end. Okay, so get weather data, so this is the get method. Okay, now similarly you would be having post method. We'll be learning this practically when we are learning Node.js, don't worry, but right now just assume that you have some very basic knowledge of API for now, and you would be creating these in future. Now what is the post method? When you want to save some data to my database, for example, you have an API which takes data from front end, that is form data like registration data from front end to back end. Backend would call a post method which would save data to database. Okay, so you would simply save some data to database, save data to DB. Okay, for example, you would be like registering a user. Okay, registering a user, sign up. Okay, right, sign up page. What does sign up page does? Saves the data to database. Okay, so in your sign up page, for example, if I talk about Amazon website, you have the sign up page for users. Okay, once you hit that, that's the front end of the sign up page. It would send the data to backend, and backend would actually send that data to database. So for that you have to call a post method. In the front end you would be calling a post method. Okay, and if you want to get the data in the front end, you would be calling a get method. If you want to post the data, you would be calling the post method. Okay, similarly we have different methods. So register a user, this is an example. Okay, register a user. Now one more thing is, we have put. So put is actually used to update a data. Suppose you have some user named as XYZ. In this you want to update the email of the user. So what you would be doing, email along with all the fields, you have to send this data from front end to back end, all the fields and email updated. This is actually known as put method. Okay, so you would be updating a user. Okay, updating a user. So there are a lot methods, but I'm just giving an example, updating a user. Okay, you can use it for different purposes. Now similarly we have patch. So what is patch? So remember, just now I said, when you are talking about put, you have to send email, you want to update email along with the older fields also. So these all the fields are required in the put. But in patch we only send that field. That means for this user I only want to update the email, so I would be only sending this amount of data. So this is actually known as patch. So patch is I think better, because you don't need to send whole data, so it's taking less time. You don't need to transfer complete data, you just need to pass that data which you want to update, and automatically backend would figure out things. Okay, so it's again used for updating, used for updating, but it's a better approach in some cases. Okay, so this is again the patch method. Now guys, similar to this, after this we have the delete method, and with, as the name suggests, if you want to delete something, some field, okay, so for that you would be using the delete method. For example, I want to delete a user named as XYZ, so I would just delete that user. Okay, so delete a user. So these are all the methods which you would be having in your APIs, and these all methods would be actually used in Node.js. Okay, that means we would be writing these methods in Node.js and call these methods in our front end. That means backend would be in Node.js and our front end would be calling these methods with some APIs, right? So we'll see that later on, but I hope you got a very basic overview of how these methods actually work, right? So now after this, one more important thing is status codes. So what are the status codes? So status codes are, remember when you visit a website and sometimes you might see some page like 404 not found or 500 internal server error when server doesn't work for any website, or if you have written wrong web page, so you would receive 404 not found. Why do we get that? So these are actually known as status code, which actually tell a lot with just status codes. So whenever you are calling an API, you would get status codes along with them, whether the API response is good or not. That means, for example, if I give you example of the restaurant again, you send the order to the chef. Chef says that food is not available. What does that mean? 404 not found. Okay, so you would send this response 404. Chef says food is prepared and send that to the front end. That means status code would be sent is 200. Okay. Chef says that right now light is down, light is not available, or the materials are not available. So I can simply say status code 500, that means server issue. Okay, so things like that. So let me just explain them in short very easily. You don't need to remember everything, but very basic ones like 200, 404 and 500 are very useful. Okay, so first of all, if I talk about 200, 201 and 204, that means starting with 2. So these status codes indicate that request was successful. If you receive any kind of request which starts from 2, whatever is the ending, that means request was successful, right? So 200 means okay, the request was successful, the server provides requested data. This is for 200. 201 means the request was successful and new resource has been created. Okay, so whenever you make a post request, for example, and as a response you receive 201, that means your data was created, like, right? 204 simply means no content. That means the request was successful, but there was no data to return. So in that case, you would actually send this response. Similarly, we are talking about 3xx, that means starting from 3. So it's used for redirection. These code indicate that further action is needed to complete the request. Okay, so when there is something missing, like fields which are missing, so you would be using 3. Okay, you would be using 3xx, that means something is missing, you have to add more details to complete the request. Okay, so for example 301 means move permanently. That means if you're requesting some API or a URL, so you can say that this URL has moved permanently to some other URL, so you would send this response. Okay, 302 means found. The requested URL is temporarily located in different URL. That means you can say that this website is temporarily moved to some other URL. 304 simply means not modified. That means the resource has not been modified since the last request. So you would be actually rarely using this 301. You don't need this very much, but yeah, it's there. So you can just read more about this on the Mozilla official website. But in most cases, personally, I haven't used this in my development journey, but yeah, in some cases you might need this, so you can keep this for your information, right? So after this we have numbers starting from 4, that means status code starting from 4. So this is actually depicting client errors. Okay guys, so I made a slight correction here. It's 401, 400 and 404. Okay, so these three are main requests in the 4 series, and 400 simply means bad request. That means the request was malformed or invalid. It means user made an invalid request. 401 means unauthorized. That means you are not authorized. You are not logged in to access this website. 404 means not found. That means the requested URL which you are requesting is not available. That means it doesn't exist or it's corrupt, things like that. Now this is for the front end. That means the client made some mistake. Now for the backend issues, you simply return 500 kind of response. Okay, starting from 5. That means these codes indicate that there was some issue on the server side from the backend side. So 500 code simply means internal server error. 503 means service is not available. That means if there is just a simple error in backend, then it would be 500. If the backend is not working at all, that means it's 503. Okay, that means backend has gone for some maintenance and things like that. Okay, so these were some methods which you would often see. And guys, what you can actually do is you can simply search for status codes on Google. Okay, status codes on Google. Let me just show you. You can simply search for status code Mozilla, and here you would get the official website. So this website is actually containing a lot things for you. So you can see we have different kind of status codes and you can read more about them. But the more important ones are actually starting from 2, 4 or 5. Okay, these three are really important, and others you can keep for your own information. Okay guys, so these were some responses which you must know. Whenever you make a API call, as a response you would get these codes, right? So later on when we are learning the backend in Node.js, we'll be learning more about this to get a better idea how these things really work. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you understood the basic usage of API, what are the methods in API, and what are these status codes. I will see you in the next one. Till then, have a good day. Bye bye.